16-bit hockey fans, I've got another interview for you. So soon after the last one dropped, right? Well, you know what? I've got a little bit more time in my hands as I'm taking a break from league play, so I want to do more content like this for the summer. Either way, enough about me. I talked to Oilers442, and the dude is really cool. I thought, given that he likes the Oilers and he's named after the Oilers, he's Canadian, right? Based out of Alberta? No, he's an American. So that one surprised me. Either way, we have a good chat about a variety of things like NHL 94 on the Super Nintendo, on the Sega Genesis, talk about retro video games, talk about the community of NHL 94, the evolution of the game, so much more. Hope you enjoy this one. It was a lot of fun to chat with him, and I could have gone for another hour or two, it felt like. Either way, I think you'll like this. So sit back, crack open a cold one, and enjoy. I take it you're an Oilers fan, right? Because it's Oilers442.
Yeah, so an Edmonton Oilers fan since about 2009. So I came in right at the right time as the decade of darkness started. So it's funny though, because I'm from the United States. I actually I was living in Tennessee at the time when I got into the Edmonton Oilers. I live in Indiana now for the last 2 years. It's this weird thing where like anytime I get into a new sport, it's like whoever the first two teams are that I watch, it's usually going to be one of those two that's my favorite team. So first NHL game I watched in 2009 when I was 19 years old. I can't remember who the Oilers were playing, but I knew enough about the Oilers, their history with Wayne Gretzky, how great they were in the 80s. And then, of course, I played NHL 94. I knew about Doug Weight, Peter Klima, all those guys. So it was just one of those things like, okay, well, I'm an Edmonton Oilers fan. That's it. And, here we are like 17 years later or whatever it is.
So too bad you missed. I mean, you sound like you're young enough. It looks like you're young enough. You missed the dynasty of the 80s. They were a heck of a team. I think they won 4 Stanley Cups in 5 years, something like that. It was something stupid, or
Yes.
4 to 6. It was just something like really, 4 to 6, something like that. And maybe I'm wrong. Somebody's going to correct me, but they had a huge run, and they were so. Come on, man, they had a great team, but man, oh man, I mean, but you're young enough to probably not have played 94 when it came out. Am I wrong?
What you are correct almost in a sense. Like, so I don't mind dating myself. I'm 36 years old, just turned 36 a couple months ago. I can actually honestly, Len, I remember like roughly when 94 came out, I think I would have been about 3 years old at the time. I can literally remember sitting like in my brother's bedroom because he had the Super Nintendo. Like we would kind of trade off the consoles just as they came out, like I got the Nintendo, for example, when my brother got the Super Nintendo. Then when he got the PS1, I got the Super Nintendo, so on and so forth. But the point I'm trying to make is I remember roughly about the time when the game came out. I actually remember sitting in shootout mode. Probably I would have been, again, 3 years old, or maybe I was 4, roughly within the next year. But I remember the game came out. My mom and dad got it for my brother. I remember sitting in shootout mode on Super Nintendo with Marty McSorley, actually doing shootout attempts, at a very, very young age. Now, granted, I didn't understand, the whole deking system and whatnot for another little while, but I can remember sitting in my brother's room trying to play it, even at, the ripe old age of 3 or 4. So I guess I was technically old enough, but really in the traditional sense, I mean, yeah, I was probably too young to really be trying to play it at that point, if we're being all honest.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, everybody has your own story, and yours is quite unique. So you landed at SNES first. That was the console of choice because circumstances. When did you ever get around it to trying Genesis? In general, I'm not talking about 94, NHL 94, just Genesis at all. Like, when did you get exposed to that?
So that's another one that I can kind of remember at an early age. Like we did not have a Genesis growing up. We were mostly Nintendo or PlayStation household, basically. I remember though going to my cousin's house. They lived probably about, 25 minutes away, something like that. We lived in upstate New York at the time, by the way. I might as well mention that for context. We lived just outside of Syracuse, New York until 2004. I was 14 when we moved, but I remember I would have been somewhere around, 4 or 5, 6 years old, something like that. My cousins, they had a Sega Genesis, and I can remember playing Sonic the Hedgehog on it. I know they had one of the NHL games also. I don't believe it was 94, but I want to say it was 95 or 96. So I do remember at least trying the Sega Genesis in general somewhere around 94, 95, 96, but we never actually owned one. You kind of alluded to the question a moment ago, so I'll kind of answer it. But playing NHL 94 Genesis, actually did not try it until a year ago, coming back to the online community and playing NHL 94 again in general. I remember just kind of thinking, well, hey, we got RetroArch now, we're playing it. Let's see what this Genesis version is all about. And I'd read so much over the years about how different it was, you know, just the different mechanics, the weight bug, all that sort of stuff. I was downright shocked, though, at how much different the Genesis version played. Basically, in a sense, you know, more or less really almost learning a new game, really, if you will.
Yeah, it truly, if you ever played 93, it's interesting because the NHL PA 93 for Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, on the surface, they're the same. I know it was kind of a port to the Super Nintendo, and it was a terrible port. It was choppy, but still in the, you know, the base model of the game, it's the same thing. 94 different directions because you had two different programmers. You had Lesser, and God, I forget it was a Canadian guy that programmed the Super Nintendo. I can't remember his name. But anyways, whoever he is, I'm sorry about that. But to go back to the good old days of Super Nintendo, PlayStation, because that's, you know, you grew up. I'm curious what other games were memorable for you growing up, because I love talking to people about those retro games.
Yeah, it is a long list, so I'm going to try to
let's do it, man.
All right. I'll try to go through it somewhat chronologically, but, you know, obviously I mentioned, of course, with Nintendo, you know, it's a given. The first 3 Super Mario Brothers games for NES, those were extremely memorable for me.
Hold on. I got to stop you there. Yeah. Mario 2, piece of crap or not?
I liked it personally.
Really? Even growing up, something felt wrong with it. And then after it came to be, we learned it was Doki Doki Panic with a Super Mario skin on top of it. I mean, it all made sense, but yeah, interesting. You liked it. I could never. I loved the third Mario 3, phenomenal game. Mario 1, but 2, I don't know. Anyways, didn't mean to interrupt you. Go on with your.
No, you're fine. And actually, I'm glad you opened up that line of thinking, because maybe that is one of those things where I was probably so young at the time when Mario 2 was out, you know, because I would have been playing it at age 4 or 5. I think to me, it's like, you know, young enough to understand that the game was conceptually different or fundamentally different, whatever you want to call it. But I never really gave much of a thought to the fact that, you know, just the overall mechanics of it were different and whatnot. It really wasn't until I think when I was like 15 or 16 getting into game emulation when I was in high school, it really wasn't until that point that I read and understood the fact that it was Doki Doki Panic just reskinned. So in retrospect, it's one of those where I can say, you know, if you want to look at the first 3 Mario games, and we'll even include Super Mario World for Super Nintendo, if you want to really look at those first 4 Mario games, I would say Super Mario 2, the USA version, is absolutely the weakest out of the 4. I'll be straight up about that as far as my opinion. But I think if I just look at it just as a whole, though, just by itself, I do feel like it's a good game. So, I mean, I enjoyed it for what it was as a kid, and I still go back and play it occasionally now and do enjoy it. But yeah, so going back to what we were saying, definitely the first couple of Super Mario games on Nintendo and Super Nintendo, the first 2 Castlevania games, we were huge fans of those growing up on the NES, of course. Like I said, NHL 94 was certainly extremely memorable. All the Madden games, I had every single Madden game from Madden 94 up until about Madden 07, I think, was when I stopped buying them. What else? There was the WWE SmackDown series on PS1 going into PS2. I was a huge fan of those games. I think I had every single one of them from the original SmackDown 1 in 2000 up until SmackDown versus Raw 07. Was also a huge fan of the Ace Combat games, the flight simulator games on PS1 and PS2. Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon was an extremely memorable one. Heck, I even was typing in Discord today talking with Kashim from the Super Nintendo side. Medal of Honor, that was a huge series that I loved big time. In the middle of a playthrough right now of doing Medal of Honor Rising Sun when I'm not doing NHL 94. So I don't know. I mean, that's, you know, there's a heck of a lot more, but, you know, that's more or less really, I think, like a personal greatest hits, if you will, in games that are really still always swirling in my brain at all times, or even just ones I go back and play. Oh, SOCOM US Navy SEALs. I got to mention that one too. Was a huge fan of those ones on PlayStation 2. Yeah, that's, like I said, though, that's kind of, I'd say that's the bulk of them off the top of my head. I'm sure there's a few other ones, but, you know, Tecmo Super Bowl. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Tecmo Super Bowl. That's another big one that I absolutely love.
how would you fare if you played against DPS? That guy apparently is just a machine in that game. I had the pleasure of sitting down physically next to him, and I was chatting about his success in the game, and I think from what I gathered, he's probably one of, if not the best player in the world in that. So I'm curious if you could hold your own, if you could give him at least a challenge in that game, or it would. I told him if I play him, it would be a shutout. I wouldn't even be like, it would be so bad to watch me play, but maybe somebody else like you, maybe you could score a few points.
Well, I'll tell you what, Len, if it's anything like NHL 94, I probably could maybe for the first, I don't know, the first quarter or so, probably have him a little bit tripped up just because it's a new style. You're getting used to the nuances of a new player. But me not having like all of like the knowledge of the online play for Tecmo Super Bowl and all that, I'm sure very quickly my lack of knowledge would like, I know a lot about like the players, the attributes, who the best players are on each team. But as far as say like the best ways like to score, the best way to utilize the players, like, sure, I know what works versus the computer. And my brother and I, we used to play the heck out of one another growing up. But because I only have just basically that experience of playing versus my brother, I just don't have, like, say, all of those other nuances that a seasoned online player would have. And a lot of that really goes back to my experience even with learning NHL 94, just when I got into the online scene in 2010. Because, I remember coming in, like, playing Super Nintendo, and C4 Outlaws was my first opponent. And I remember thinking, like, that, it's like, I'm going to be just fine. It's like, I'm great at this game. I'm going to be awesome. I lost the first game 7-2. So I learned very quickly that, you come in online against these guys and it's a very, very different story. So I know just on that alone, trying to play Tecmo Super Bowl online against EPS, I'm willing to bet that I would get destroyed.
Yeah, he apparently is, he's the absolute best. And it's kind of like the AJ. I'm not sure if you had the pleasure of playing AJ in either system now. He proved himself to be the king of both of those systems. But man, if you ever play against him, it's a humbling experience. You walk away, it's like, the heck just happened?
Oh yeah. I've heard about. So I've never gotten to play him on Genesis. Of course, I've read all about basically his triumphs on Genesis. Very well aware of who he is on that side of things. I actually did have the pleasure of playing against him in I think it was the spring 2015 season for Super Nintendo. We not only did we do regular season games together, but we ended up meeting in the finals of the spring 2015 Classic season. It would have been SNES, and of course you go back, look at the record books, all that. The history will show that I won that series 4-1, and I was the spring champion. And I don't mean to make this sound like I'm gloating. I just, just mentioning that, of course, just from the top, but 4-1 winning that series, it's not indicative of how tough of an opponent he was. Because the entire time having to play that series, you're constantly thinking, you're trying to stay one step ahead of him, and even at that time, I know he had not put, as much time in, so to speak, online on Super Nintendo. I know nowadays it's a much, much different story, just considering all the Super Nintendo leagues he's been in. But I just thought it was the coolest thing that it's like, man, this guy, he dominates on Genesis. He comes over here on Super Nintendo, comes right into the A League, without a whole ton of experience online on Super Nintendo. He not only fit in immediately, but then he's already making it to the finals. And like I said, I might have won the series 4-1, but it was not indicative of how tough it was. None of those games were easy by any stretch. I imagine nowadays, with how much he's probably learned even more about the Super Nintendo game, certainly how much I've probably regressed in the 10 years I was away, I think things would be a heck of a lot more even nowadays. And if we were to meet up in a series, odds are he'd probably win.
Oh yeah, he smoked, not smoked. He took Professor to the distance and took him out in King of '94. In terms of the evolution of the game of Super Nintendo, because I know you can't speak much on the Genesis side of things, but have you noticed the game evolving, the way people play, the way people approach it? Like, what could you say about that? What sort of feedback could you give on that topic?
Oh, yeah, I can give an awful lot of feedback to that, quite frankly. I remember, so I guess I'll start really with the beginning of my journey back in December of 2010. I remember coming in, playing a lot of these, I guess I'll call them A-League guys, because every one of them either was in A at the time or they ended up moving up to A not too long after that. I remember playing guys like C4 Outlaws, Grado, XOT82, CJ Garnett, Fenty 62. There was numerous guys. they were good players. They all had their different things that they leaned towards, or their different tendencies, if you will, that they would do on and off, just from an offensive standpoint. But a lot of like the way that Super Nintendo was being played was that, basically like it was basically just deep goals. And you had, of course, the standard one-timers, driving up to the corner, then you center it back, diagonally back to the center, and you're trying to score on the one-timer. So, I noticed within, probably the first month, 2 months of playing, that most of these guys, they kind of had, similar ways that they went about trying to score. I mentioned Grado. He was the one who was a lot different in the very, very beginning, where he would do these elaborate passing plays in the zone, setting up, say, like 5 or 6 passes, just waiting until the absolute right time to, unleash a one-timer with an open guy. And if you weren't very good defensively, or if you were not disciplined like I wasn't at the time, you'd be trying to go for the body checks, or you'd be trying to cover certain guys positionally, and he would just do all sorts of passes that would completely pull you right out of position. So that was one of those things where not only did I have to evolve to try to, just be able to stop that first and foremost, but everybody else in the league, they had to do the same thing also. And it was the same thing with XOT82, because he would do a lot of those elaborate passing plays too, or even just setting up like different forms of like give and go one-timers. So there was a lot of that. Those two, they ended up leaving the league, I think, at some point around 2015 or something like that. But it was just one of those things where, because of the bar that they had set, everybody had to evolve. Everybody had to get that much sharper offensively and defensively. So then what was kind of left from then on was that, I'm not going to say I was the only one, but there was me, there was Anatar, a couple other guys who, because we had set the bar relatively higher as far as just play and elaborate skill, elaborate passing plays, things that you had to do. I think you then saw later where there was guys like Bob Kudelski, 26, who else? Of course, Token Toma, the professor. You had these different guys that were coming in at a later time after people like me had left. But because the remnants of the things that we had done from, say, 2010 to 2015 were still very much a part of just the meta, or, the way that the game was played online, they had to evolve basically their skill level to be that much higher. So then you fast forward all this time later. And for me personally, I come back last year and I'm playing some of these B guys, just in online exhibition games, and it didn't feel like things had changed way too much. Then, though, you play Token Toma in exhibition games, and I got smoked. And it's like you're finding out very quickly that's like, okay, once you go against these A-level guys, you're seeing just how much the game really had truly evolved in the time that I was away. Even last night, I sat there and played Token Toma in 3 exhibition games. I'm not sure what exactly it was, but he must have been feeling that much more relaxed because, I'd been playing a lot of exhibs the last little while against Great One to Envy and some of these other guys.
Yeah.
Been doing a lot of work with him, feeling like I was pretty sharp, and then Token just smoked me last night. And it's just, just one of those moments where it's like, well, I guess I got to go back to the drawing board if I'm going to be coming back to SNESA at some point. So that's a lot there, just throwing a lot at the wall, but I hope it kind of lends a little bit of, I guess, a detail of how the league has evolved. Again, I don't know if I did that the best, but I could probably go in a lot more detail, but it has evolved quite a bit in the 16 years that I've been around, here and there and whatnot.
So you're playing a lot with Great One to Envy, and I met him.
He told me that.
NHL, yeah, so it's a tournament in London, not too far from here, and it was the pleasure of meeting him. And yeah, it was a Sega Genesis tournament, which was not his forte. And yeah, so he's playing a lot of Super Nintendo Online. I think he's doing a little bit of Genesis too, but I'm not 100% sure. But I know for sure he's a Super Nintendo dude. But you mentioned 4 guys, and I want to get your comments on each of them. Maybe give like a brief, what you have your experience with them, what they're all about online, like their strengths and so forth. The first one I'm going to come up with Anatar.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I want to hear your thoughts on him.
Anatar, I laugh because I'll be the first to say that he was the one guy that I felt like I could never solve. And I say that also because, he used to tell me, like, we would play exhibition games, we would play our regular seasons. We never once met in the playoffs. It never once came to be that we met in playoffs. And so I don't know who holds the record nowadays for the most Super Nintendo A online classic championships, but I want to say he has the most. It's either 5, 6, something like that. I lost count over the years. So I always kind of say that in my mind, I feel like he's the most decorated SNES online player of all time, just from the number of A-level championships he won. But he, and I remember telling him one night, this was like back in 2018. I remember telling him one night, I'm like, man, you've got the most number of championships ever. That makes you the greatest of all time. There's no disputing that. And as humble as he is, because he's a wonderful guy, so humble, he turns right around and he tells me, he's like, well, we have to remember, out of all those championships I won, Oilers, you were never in any of those seasons where I won. And I'm just thinking like, oh man, it's like,
he's a nice guy. I met him.
Oh yeah,
cool
yeah.
Dude. Like,
it's just I gritted my teeth because it's like, man, had we met in the playoffs, he probably would have played circles around me. Anitar was the one guy where I felt like that I knew what was coming every single time. He's going to drive down with his very high tempo game, and he's just going to ram the puck right down your throat no matter what you do. You knew what was coming every time, and I never could figure out a way to stop it. And I know that's kind of keeping it at more of a basic level, but the guy was he was one of the first players that I played against where it felt like his talent at the time was absolutely inhuman. I know that he focuses more on the Genesis side of things nowadays, so I'm not really sure where things are with him with his SNES game. But if he's half as good at Genesis as he was in Super Nintendo back when I used to play him regularly, the guy's off the charts. Much respect, incredible player, and a great person too.
You caught yourself. Did you call it SNES or SNES? I call it SNES, but
SNES. Maybe I said SNES there. I really don't.
Oh no, I thought you were going to say SNES. I never say SNES. I'm an SNES. That's the way I learned it growing up. Bob Kadowski, want to hear your thoughts on that dude? Cool guy.
Yeah.
They're all cool guys.
Yeah. Bob's another cool guy. I know he's been around for a very, very long time. He actually may be the most tenured SNES player at this point. I couldn't tell you what year he entered into the league playing online, but I want to say it might have been 2006, 2007, something like that. And for me, like the little bit that I played him over the years, I would see like a clear progression in his game where, he wasn't necessarily the best at everything, but he was very, very good at just all of the different aspects of the game. I think he later did end up winning a Super Nintendo A championship, which absolutely well deserved, just considering the amount of time that he put in it, just the amount of time that he was around. Just a very, very solid player, very, very well-rounded. He was one that you couldn't necessarily take for granted what was happening, because you knew that even if you were shutting down, say, like the deke attempts or anything like that, he could turn right around and he could give you some crazy one-timer play, something like that. So just somebody very, very skilled, just very, very deep knowledge of the game, always kept you on your toes no matter what. And again, another great guy too. I always enjoyed the conversations with him outside of the game even.
And the Professor, that's another name that you mentioned. I want to hear your thoughts on him.
So Professor, unfortunately, I have not had a chance to play him yet. I've asked him for exhibition games, I think once or twice in the year that I've been back. Just haven't heard back from him. From what I understand, he's a very, very busy guy nowadays with his job, all that sort of stuff. Unfortunately,
put on the gauntlet here. Like let's get something going, right? Like, Professor, what the heck's going on? Why are you ducking Oilers?
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
I mean, I'll take the high road on that one, only because just certainly, like, as life changes, just different things with job, personal commitments, all that sort of stuff. Even in the spirit of competition, it's always tough for me to go into that mindset of, trying to throw down a gauntlet or anything like that. But no, everything I've seen, I've never really gotten to interact with him, but, seems like a very nice guy. The results speak for themselves as far as just, winning championships and all that. I mean, come on, with a name like the Professor, obviously you got to know what you're doing. So he's one that I hope to get a chance to play against, and pretty sure that I'll find myself kind of just cringing at some of the great goals that he'll score, and I'll probably end up throwing my hat or something like that. It just, man, it's like, oh, I got to evolve some more to match this guy.
That's how you get better. You play these great players, and you either sink or swim. And a lot of people, they're learning how to swim. And last name Token Toma, you mentioned him a few times. I'm sure you have something to say about him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of mentioned earlier just his ability, all that sort of stuff. If I can put a little bit of a humorous but yet at the same time serious spin that I think describes his skill level. When I was playing against him last night, he comes down alone on a breakaway. So I hit the X button going into manual goalie control, and I'm convinced that I'm going to stop it. It's like it's a 50-50 shot, left or right, backhand or forehand. I'm going to stop it. So he kind of moves to the right. I think he was Vancouver. It might have been Trevor Linden. he kind of moves over to the right. So I sell out with the goalie. It's like, oh, he's going forehand. Well, instead of doing like, say, a spinorama or something like that, he kind of does a half spin and just shoots the puck right up and just scores. I'd never seen that move before. And it was just like, my proverbial jaw basically just dropped. That it's like, wow, okay, he obviously meant to do that. That was a move that he has practiced. It was one that I had never seen before in all of the years of playing this game online. And it was yet again just a reminder that it's like, yep, just when I think I know everything and just when I think that I have seen everything, this guy pulls out something new, and I look like a fool in a good way. So it's a humorous story, but at the same time, I think it speaks to his skill level. And again, it's another one where the results don't lie. I know he's won at least one SNES A championship. That doesn't happen by accident. You put the time in, you put the practice in, all that sort of stuff. Great player. And another one who I've had some good conversations with just in general, even outside of, just playing NHL 94. He's one that I wish would have been around 16 years ago when I was first in the community, because he would have absolutely fit in just with the group of guys that we had back then. Again, just another great player, another great guy.
I'm going to just sidetrack a little bit here. When I play Super Nintendo, I'm primarily a Genesis guy, but I do dabble in Super Nintendo. And when I do that, what happens is my game in Genesis slightly evolves, at least for a temporary period of time, because something bleeds from my Super Nintendo game to my Genesis game. I tend to do more dekes in Genesis then, and I tend to do more goals from within, very close to the goalie, rather than doing a lot of one-timers, which I tend to do a lot of. So when you started playing Genesis about a year or so ago, did anything from Genesis bleed into Super Nintendo to your game, or did that not happen?
A little bit. There is one thing in particular that I can absolutely say has come over. I don't do it way too much in Super Nintendo, but it rears its head occasionally. You know how on Genesis that whether you're on a breakaway or even if you have a defenseman or two in front of you, you kind of cut in front of the goalie, but then you kind of loop back and do like the floater goal. Like basically like we'll just call it the forehand floater. I know I've seen them refer to it as that.
The whale mail, as the Whalers would probably call it. If you ever play him, he's famous for that. But yeah,
never have played him. Never heard it referred to as that. But I do like the name. I'll probably be calling it that from now on, to be honest with you. But just I used to call it the C4 Outlaws floater, because C4 Outlaws used to use it a lot on Super Nintendo. It turned out it was a good way to score on Super Nintendo against somebody on a breakaway. That as you're coming down, they switch to the manual goalie, and then they just hit the A button just to go for a save. They don't try to move left or right. And I think Halifax had said years ago that if you time it correctly, you can pretty much make the save probably 90% of the time. I don't know what it is. I've never been able to learn the timing, so I can't do it correctly. But I would have guys that would stuff me on this play, and I think I figured out once or twice maybe how to stop, people with it. C4 Outlaws, it seemed like the way that he would get around it was he would just come in and do a forehand floater, and it seemed for whatever reason most of the time to get around just that timing of the guy hitting the A button to make the save. So I've had to kind of learn to use that move more in Genesis against some of these guys, just to either take advantage of just, like the slower reaction time in general. Cause you know how you have to hold the button to get the manual goalie in Genesis. So there's always just a little bit more of a slower reaction time just in general. So the floater can work very, very well with a player like Mike Gartner if it's been set up correctly. So I find that through having done that just in Genesis, getting used to it, just learning to do that as a relatively consistent scoring technique, I'll now find myself sometimes that on Super Nintendo, if I'm driving outside, I'll do it a lot with Shane Corson with Edmonton, for example. I'm driving to the outside, and if I have a player who's kind of sitting back a little bit with his defenseman and he's going to try to either take away the outside lanes or something like that, I'll just cut back in and then just kind of do that floater, and I'll find myself kind of utilizing that a little bit more. It's, again, not necessarily something I'm using a ton on Super Nintendo just because I've got a lot of moves that I like using, but I am slowly getting it in there. And every now and then you can pop somebody with it and surprise them when they're not used to it. They're thinking that, oh, well, he's going to automatically rush to the outside. He's going to go around the net. He's going to try to do his usual passing stuff. But then you quickly cut in with a guy fast enough and do that floater, and you can surprise him and get a quick goal out of it. So that's definitely one thing for sure that I can say for a fact has come over from Genesis and has become a part of my Super Nintendo game. If anything, I probably need to integrate it a little bit more, because that's really, I think, that one of the secrets really to being good at Super Nintendo and Genesis for that matter. You've got to have a very, very deep bag of tricks.
Yeah, 100%. And Yeah, and you got to just keep practicing. And I do that style, that goal, that whale milk goal. I've been trying to do that a little bit more and trying to incorporate that in my game. And it's tough for me. It's really tough. I can't get it, but I'll just keep going. I'll bang my head against the wall. And just want to go back. I mean, I'm an older dude, right? I've been, I'm approaching 50. So I'm old enough. I've played Atari. I played all that, those old systems. So when I look at like frames per second and stuff like that, it's something that doesn't really impact me. It could be like 1 frame per second or 30 frames. Doesn't matter to me. But some people say the SNES is slower, 20 frames versus Genesis 30. Do you notice that when you play both of those two systems, or you're like me? It's not even noticeable.
It does. It stands out quite a bit nowadays. Because I have become more. I guess this is the thing, Len, where it's like for me growing up, it was never a big deal just because, internet wasn't really a thing in the 90s, or at least not until, say, 98, something like that for us personally. So it's like, that whole thing about frames per second. Oh, well, a locked 30 frames versus 60 frames, all the discussions we see nowadays, that stuff wasn't really a big deal growing up. So I never really used to notice it that much. Super Nintendo, I absolutely never noticed it because it was the only version I ever played for all those years. But I know that like coming into Genesis last year playing it, I noticed immediately that, oh yeah, it's definitely smoother. It does play differently, feels pretty nice, all that good stuff. And then the very next time that I went back to Super Nintendo, either later that day or the next day, something like that, it stood out immediately from there, just how choppy the Super Nintendo was. And then it was kind of like, I kind of just did one of these and I'm like, huh. So now I see what they've been saying for all these years about Super Nintendo having the choppier frame rate. It is something that if I play Super Nintendo exclusively for a couple days, I actually won't even say that. If I go back to Super Nintendo within about 5 minutes or so, I don't notice the choppiness anymore. But if it's one where I'm kind of switching back and forth, like, that same day or anything like that, it is immediately noticeable going forward. So yeah, it is something that I do see nowadays, and I'm obviously very, very well aware of it. In the end, it doesn't impact things way, way too much. I will say that at least as far as just the differences in the way the two games are played, just from an offensive standpoint, I will say for me also, even kind of an extension of the last question, I will say that like playing Genesis for a while, trying to generate offense on it and then coming back to Super Nintendo, it feels a lot easier for me to score on Super Nintendo just because, the passing is more loose, all of that sort of stuff. So it kind of similar to what you were saying before. It feels like that I play Genesis for a while, I come back over to Super Nintendo, and it will feel like I at least have kind of like a temporary leveling up of the game, kind of like what you were saying. So it happens kind of in opposite for me, that like Genesis is almost like running with ankle weights. Then you take the ankle weights off, go back to Super Nintendo, and it feels like you're just flying.
Yeah. That's a very good analogy. And now I want to talk about the game itself, the players within the game.
Yeah.
The 16-bit players, not the human opponents behind the controller. The lighter guys, the lightweight guys, like the Flurries, the Gilmores, the Gretzkys, maybe even Naronic, if you want to throw them in this category. I mean, are they usable players in '94 on the Super Nintendo?
Yeah, they're usable. I will say that for me, I tend to go away from them just because of the natural disadvantage with the weight, because we know there's no weight bug in Super Nintendo, but they are absolutely usable. Like, it's funny because like Great One to Envy, I talk about this with him a lot of times. If I'm ever using Chicago, I tend to not use Jeremy Roenick at center. And he thinks I'm crazy for that. And I totally get it because, JR, obviously, the highest rated player for Chicago, you would think obviously is your best fit at center. And I would say in most cases, that's absolutely true. I just find that the weight for me, it's again, just that classic thing, we say it all the time. The lighter weight makes him something of a sitting duck at center, where if you have, say, a Dave Manson or a Marty McSorley, somebody like that on defense on the other side, they're going to destroy Jeremy with a huge hit. So to me, it's kind of one of those things that's like, okay, even though he has really good shot power, really good shot accuracy, I love what he can do at the center or at center, but it's like for me, because of the weight, he's something of a liability. He also can't really interject his own heavy hitting quite as much. So for me, what I try to do is I'll try to mitigate the weakness, and I'll also try to use his speed as a strength. And I find for me, moving him out to the right wing and utilizing him over there, it makes him a more usable player. It kind of mitigates some of his weaknesses. And then if I bring somebody like Mikel Goulet over at center, who is heavier and has just as good of shot accuracy, I feel like for me, it kind of balances out Chicago's lineup just a little bit more. So that's kind of the example of just what I do with Jeremy Roenick. Doug Gilmour, it's sort of the same thing. I don't use him at center for Toronto, but I still leave him in the lineup because, he's 88 overall roughly. I know it calculates out differently every game, but roughly 88 overall, something like that. You'd be foolish not to use that player in your lineup, even despite the low weight. So for him, I'll move him out to the left wing. I'll use Dave Andrewchuk at center instead. And for me, I feel like it just kind of balances out the team a little bit more. Gilmour can use his speed on the wing to kind of push the pace of the game a little bit better. Andrewchuk, yes, he's slower, but he can throw down some heavy body checks. He can take body checks really well. So he can stand in a little bit better for one-timers at center. And then, of course, a lot of players, they love to try to find somebody streaking down center for a breakaway. As long as Andrewchuk's not caught too far up ice, he's able to play a relatively decent two-way game. So, and Wayne Gretzky, now, okay, here's one of my favorites with Wayne Gretzky. I always make the joke that SNES NHL 94 is the one instance that Jimmy Carson is better than Wayne Gretzky at something in the world of NHL. Because, anybody who's obviously a fan of the NHL just over many, many years knows that Jimmy Carson was the centerpiece of the package in the Wayne Gretzky trade that went back to Edmonton, in exchange for Gretzky going to LA. Then, ironically, Carson comes back to LA in 1993 for their playoff run, at the trade deadline that year or whenever it was. It might have been a little before the deadline. But it's like Jimmy Carson for me, because of his shot accuracy, his shot power, the fact that he's 212 pounds, Gretzky's only 172. I don't use Wayne Gretzky at all for LA. I take him out and I put Jimmy Carson in at center. And even though he's not quite the best shooter on the team, I just find LA just runs like a machine with Jimmy Carson at center. So for me, it's just one of those that I like Wayne Gretzky. He is good in Super Nintendo 94. If you have a guy get injured, like say a Luc Robitaille or a Tomas Sandstrom, Gretzky can absolutely come in and be effective. It's just one of those things of just knowing, though, that because he's lighter, he's going to be a target and maybe potentially he's going to possibly take some big hits in the game. Yeah. And so you just have to be ready for it and just try to work around it, basically.
So you're putting him ahead of Granato in terms of the depth chart?
I would, yes. And my only reason for that is, I know that Tony Granato has the elusive 100 speed rating. And even my brother, for example, he would use Tony Granato when he would use the LA Kings when we would play, just whether growing up or sometimes as adults. The only thing with Tony Granato is I believe his stick handling rating, I want to say, is a base 3. If I try to go back to the classic way of doing the attributes, I know Granato's stick handling rating is a little bit lower. I remember watching, I shouldn't even say watching. I remember in some of the games that me and my brother would play when I was in my 20s, my brother would win a face-off in his own zone. Granato would be streaking up the left or the right side by himself. My brother throws that stretch pass up to him for a breakaway. Granato fumbles the pass, and the play is dead on arrival. And so I just remember from watching that's I'm probably not going to use Granato all that much. I will say that, I'm kind of in a phase right now where I am constantly looking at potential new lineup combinations. I may eventually try Tony Granato and just see what would happen. But at this point, I would say that, yes, I would have Wayne Gretzky higher on the depth chart than Tony Granato for Super Nintendo.
That's fair. Who's playing right wing for you in Toronto?
So for Toronto, Nikolai Borshevsky. I did, though, the last time I used Toronto, I did try Glenn Anderson at right wing because I know he's 196 pounds. Borshevsky's 188, so slight weight difference, not too big in the grand scheme of things. But every now and then those weight differences can come into play with, body checks and whatnot. So I tried Glenn Anderson in one game. I think I scored 2 or 3 goals with him in the game. So I don't know. Anderson's probably going to get a longer look here at this point, just going forward with any games that I play with Toronto. If nothing else, I know he's not any worse than Borshevsky just in a general sense with the attributes. So maybe it's going to be one of those things where, just depending on how the trial run goes, maybe I might go back and forth with the two players for my right wing.
No love for John Cullen or Wendell Clark?
So I will be honest, I do like John Cullen. I remember even doing, I think it was the SDL, it was SNES Draft League, SDL 4 in the spring or summer of 2015. I remember John Cullen was one of my late round picks that I took. I do like the fact that he has decent shot ratings, and I think his weight is 196 pounds, if I remember correctly. He can come in and be effective in a situation where, if there's an injury or a penalty situation, he can come in and be effective. I just feel like between Anderson, I don't know. I feel like Anderson provides a little bit more athleticism, a little bit more speed that I typically like. Wendell Clark, I've never really tried way too much, but I do remember playing against Grado again back in like 2010, 2011. And I remember him using Wendell Clark with devastating efficiency. So I know there are instances with Wendell Clark's shot power that he can absolutely be a force on Super Nintendo. And I think he weighs 204 pounds. So the weight also, he'd be a good two-way player. So Clark's another one that probably after some time trying out Glenn Anderson, I may try inserting Clark there too. And seeing what might happen with him. Who knows? He could even be a good center in the vein of Mike Gartner, maybe just with the heavy shot power, albeit at lower accuracy.
Yeah, I see there's the options with Toronto. That's good to hear. I mean, now I want to discuss the attributes of these players. I'm curious which attributes you are fond of. Like if you could maybe rank them from the most important, in your opinion, to the least important. I want to hear your opinion on them.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of them that, you know, are kind of definitely at the top of the list. Like you could ask me on any given day and you might get a different answer as far as the order and on any given day. I guess though right now, just today, I feel like on Super Nintendo, weight is probably the one that I feel is the most important, just again because of the ability to play a two-way game. You know, if you're too light, your hitting's not going to be as effective. Obviously, if you're a heavy player, you're going to be able to knock down players easily. And it certainly helps with defensemen, for example, to have a very heavy-weighted player, because if it's an Al Iafrate or a Zarli Zalapski, odds are, you know, they're going to be able to lead the union of crease clearers, so to speak. It's kind of the old joke I like to say, but you know, those are the two ones that I think of just at first is Iafrate, Zalapski. Guys like Ray Bork with heavyweight are valuable on defense. Paul Coffey is another one, a little bit heavier, very valuable. After weight, I feel like probably shot accuracy is what I value the most next. I'm a sucker for one-timers. I love pretty one-timers. I love great setups, you know, whether it's give and go or say a 4 or 5 pass sequence. To me, it's one of the most satisfying things about playing Super Nintendo 94 is at the end of one of those sequences, you cap it off with just a deadly shot with, say, a Mario Lemieux or a Dmitry Kristich, Eric Lindros, you know, the guys that have the 100 shot accuracy. It's just so satisfying to rip off a great one-timer from a weird angle or whatever, and it just goes in, and you just kind of give yourself that pat on the shoulder, but knowing deep down that you only did that because the guy had great shot accuracy. I would say next is probably speed. You know, speed's certainly a big one because I mentioned Tony Granato earlier. You can lump in the guys like Mike Gartner. You can also put Peter Bondra in there. If you have one guy on the ice who is, say, 85 or higher with his speed, it just gives you that much more of an element to work with or that much more of a layer to your game. Because, you know, let's say it's 1-1 late in the game and it's 2 minutes left. You've got a face-off in your own zone. You win that face-off and you've got that 100 speed guy or, again, that 85 speed guy or whatever, and he just makes that streak just off the wing and you hit him with that breakaway pass or that stretch pass, I should say, for the breakaway. And then, you know, if you can score that goal in the breakaway situation, then play tight enough defense at the end and win the game 2-1, well, that right there, the 100 speed or the 85 speed or whatever just justified itself hugely. So speed, I would say, is absolutely the next one that's important. Shot power, I would look at that one relatively. Actually, no, let me back up. Stick handling, I would say, is the next one. I find that guys with 3 or above in stick handling are typically pretty reliable. There are some situations where if a guy's on the wing and he's got that 3 stick handling, you know, again, I mentioned Granato earlier, they may be more at risk of fumbling passes that are, you know, more of a stretch variety or more of a long distance pass, if you will. So I find that the stick handling is very, very important, that usually a guy is going to be reliable if he's 3 or higher. But I would say really that it's really even one of those things that I would almost even go one step higher in that I really only want guys on the ice that are actually 4 or above, because they're almost always guaranteed to catch a pass on Super Nintendo. The one instance that I have found where it seems like that it does not matter quite as much, I'm going to use 2 players for this example, Mikkel Goulet and Rick Tocchet. Both of them are 3 stick handling, and I find that if you put them at center, because of the distance of the passes that they are receiving is not quite as far, they seem to be able to catch the passes pretty reliably, even though they have a stick handling rating that's lower. So that's kind of one of those things where I'm going back and reevaluating some of these players, because as much as I love using like Pittsburgh's default line, for example, and I do think it's one of the best default lines in the game, we have to understand that Jaromir Jagr has pretty weak shot ratings, despite the fact that he has a pretty high overall rating. So then the thought hit me. It's like, well, I use Craig Simpson for Edmonton at center. I use Derek King at center for the Islanders, and I seem to be able to do pretty well with these guys. What's stopping me from using, say, a guy like Rick Tocchet at center and maybe doing a lot of damage with him? So great one to envy. He's been giving me a lot of shade for this recently, but he's like, man, you shouldn't be using Rick Tocchet at center. He's too slow. He's not effective. Well, if you know what you're doing, and if you're feeding him passes that are not way too far, he's not going to fumble passes as often. And then you get to utilize his big time shot ratings, because I know he's almost perfect in accuracy. He has really good shot power. And really, when you can do that, you've got Stevens at left wing, Tocchet at center, Mario Lemieux at right wing. You then basically have 3 players on the ice that are actually pretty good shooters. So it opens up a pretty good amount of one-timing action that you can do with Pittsburgh on Super Nintendo, beyond just what you could already do with Mario and Stevens. So it's a long-winded explanation, but I would say that stick handling is a pretty important rating because, again, 4 or higher, it's almost guaranteed they're always going to catch a pass. 3, you have to kind of be considerate of just what position are they playing, because it might influence if they're going to be able to catch a pass or not. So then from there, I would say probably shot power. It's less important to me only because, usually accuracy is most important, that, I'm going to be able to score from maybe some crazy angles if a guy has a really good accuracy. But I find that power is an important component too, because if you have a guy with great accuracy but low power, okay, you're going to be able to hit that crazy angle maybe. But if the shot's coming in slower, the goalie obviously has enough time to react to it. And then at that point, the angle doesn't really matter as much anymore. So it's a situation where, like with, say, like a guy like Mike Gartner or Stefan Richer with New Jersey, they have very high shot power, and it's great that they've got a cannon of a shot. And so it helps that if you can get that crazy angle and maybe on that one RNG roll, the accuracy dictated, okay, the puck's going to go in, but then you'll get some of those games where it's a little bit maddening because, you're getting the great angles, they're setting up in great spots in the offensive zone, but because the accuracy rating is lower, they're getting bad RNG ratings, and they're just throwing everything wide. They're throwing it above the net, or they're putting it right in the goalie's chest, and you just put your head down because it's like, man, a guy like Gartner, 700 plus goals in real life, yet he didn't have really good accuracy in the game. So it's just like, man, it's like, oh, why couldn't they give him better accuracy? And then I know from there we're kind of getting to the attributes that are a little bit less. Agility is an interesting one because it's like, I know it's very important. It governs basically how well a guy can turn. It governs basically just how quickly is he going to accelerate to his top speed. But I find that I can work with guys actually that have lesser agility. It's really if they're heavier and they have a good speed rating, I find I'm going to be okay with them. There's one player that kind of leaps to mind immediately. It's probably Ali Afraidy, because I was going to say I can't remember the name at this exact point, but I know every time I use the guy that I kind of notice this. I feel like it's Ali Afraidy. Obviously, he's heavy. He has good speed ratings, but you can notice that as soon as he picks up the puck, actually, it might be Scott Stevens, to be honest with you. As soon as you pick up the puck and you start skating forward with him, he's kind of a little bit slow, it's a little bit tough for him initially, but then after probably that first second and a half of him carrying the puck, he's up to speed and suddenly everything's fine.
Yeah.
So I find for me, it's like, you play the game enough, you get used to the heavy but fast players enough. And it's almost like agility is not as important because you just have to consider the fact that it's going to take him a second to get up to his top speed, or that you might not be able to make the precise turns. And if it's somebody like a defenseman, well, you don't really have to worry about that quite as much because it's usually a risky play anyway to try to carry the puck all the way from the defensive zone, do an end-to-end rush. Me personally, I'm looking for a breakout pass first. So agility is not as important if we want to look at it from that standpoint. What else do we have? We have agility. Oh, aggression. Aggression is one to be mindful of only because I'm sure Len, and most of our 94 vets in the community know, obviously the higher the aggression rating, the more often they're going to take penalties. I don't look at that rating way too much, to be honest with you, but I know that the guys like Marty McSorley that have a topped out aggression rating, that they're going to be landing in the penalty box more often than not. For me, Marty McSorley, his strengths far outweigh that weakness because, with the heavy weight and just, his decent defensive awareness, things like that, I feel like that, he's not really a liability being out there. Sure.
He's amazing.
I mean, I could put Alexei Zhitnik in there and I could get some better skating, better ability to rush the puck. But I just know that Zhitnik, even though he's not going to take as many penalties, at best, I'm just going to have to be mashing the B button and doing poking to try to get like a knockdown from a poke check. Marty, I don't have to worry about that as much because I know if Marty locks onto the guy and the hit connects, the guy's going down. almost always. So with Marty, it's not as big of a deal because, again, I know that if he takes penalties or whatever, there's a couple guys on the bench that can come in and basically do what they need to do for a little bit until Marty's ready to come in. So the penalties, I don't know, the aggression rating doesn't really bother me. It's not something that I concern myself with too much. I think out of the rest of the ratings, I know there's probably one or two I'm leaving out.
Checking, offensive, defensive awareness.
Yeah. So, and thank you for that. So really, when you remind me of those, I mean, the awareness ratings, they're kind of important, but again, something that I look at really lesser, if I'm being honest. But then when I think about it, they are important because, I see some of these guys with low offensive awareness, and, say if I put them at center and they're kind of just circling around doing some weird stuff, and you don't really see them planning in the right spot to get ready for, say, a one-timer to try to shoot up at the net. It's even like an interesting thing that I'll notice that some guys that have good offensive awareness, like Craig Simpson with Edmonton, say if you're starting like a rush and I put him at center, you're starting a rush with Peter Klima or Shane Corson. I'll notice like Simpson, for example, at certain times when you're coming down with the puck, he'll kind of like stop at center ice and almost wait for you to get to a certain point before he starts rushing with you. Obviously, a guy that has a lower offensive awareness rating, I just in my own experience, because of course it's all anecdotal, I haven't seen guys with the lower awareness ratings do that whole thing where they stop at center and kind of wait on the wing. So I just know that on that level alone, offensive awareness is obviously doing some things right there, just in terms of what the player's doing offensively. Defensive awareness is absolutely important, even though I have it lower on the list, because I know if a defenseman has like a lower defensive awareness, he's spinning around in his zone. He's doing all sorts of weird stuff. He's not positioned in the right place in front of the goalie to stop the oncoming rush. So I would say from that standpoint, even though I have it lower in the list, it is important to think about. And really, I think just even again, it's anecdotal evidence. I'd have to look at the ratings again, but I feel like Shane Corson has a relatively decent defensive awareness for Edmonton. And I'll notice him coming in a lot of times. Like for me, when I play like defense, usually when I turn the puck over, most players, they want to apply pressure. They want to have a heavy forecheck, and it's a great strategy. It works great. I don't do very well with it. It's just not something that I do great with. So usually if I take a shot, the goalie saves it or the puck gets away, whatever. If I have a chance to go after the puck and reclaim it, sure, I'll do it. But if I know there's no chance, I usually just turn around and retreat, because I just want to outnumber the opponent back the other way. So then it's one of those situations where if I'm controlling, and again, I'll use Edmonton as my example, if I'm controlling Craig Simpson or Peter Klima and I drop back with one of those two, I'll notice Shane Corson will kind of hang around and do the whole forecheck thing himself. And I remember even just my first time winning like the Super Nintendo A championship, I remember him creating a couple turnovers in that series that I had against Bo No's NHL 94. I remember him creating turnovers by himself, applying heavy hits by himself, being controlled by the computer. And so just, when I did a lineup guide, like writing about Edmonton a number of years ago, I wrote in that guide that Corson was very effective on the forecheck. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with his defensive awareness ratings. Because again, it's just that matter of just knowing the right place to be, clogging up the passing lanes, or even just attacking a puck carrier. And I know there's more to it that goes into it than that. I know there's been a lot of things on Earth the last couple of years about just the mechanics of the game, the way like the defense like attacks like the puck carrier when they're controlled by the computer, all that sort of stuff. But I think that it kind of segues me into that last rating that I was thinking about. And surprisingly, it's at the bottom of the list, and that's the checking rating. We'd have to, I don't know if McMarcus has done, I know he's done deep dives into the code and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if anybody has actually done like a study of like what constitutes like a checking effectiveness for Super Nintendo. I don't know like if they have determined that like the checking effectiveness is like the same formula as Genesis, or if it's only based purely on weight. But I feel like that when I'm looking at a player and just kind of assessing how effective is he going to be defensively, I really find honestly that I ignore the checking ratings most of the time. And you would think that that's counterintuitive, and maybe truthfully it is, depending on how much of a role it plays in the rating. But just again, if I use Edmonton as my example, it's like I put Craig Simpson in at center, and the fact that he's 204 pounds, I've seen enough times over the years of playing where he's able to make some relatively heavy hits, even on heavier players like, say, a Rob Blake and a Marty McSorley. And I know that Simpson has like a lower checking rating just in general. And so for me, that's kind of why I think just through him, the logic kind of applied the rest of the way, that when I think about a player's ability to lay heavy hits down and whatnot, I'm really usually only looking at their weight more than anything. Again, I don't know how right or wrong that may be, but I just find for me that's more or less what I've been looking at over the years when determining somebody's ability to be effective as a body checker.
Yeah, it's the most. I mean, I find it's the most effective way of looking. It's even in Sega Genesis. You look at the weight, and it's the inverse. Of course, the lighter the better.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned you gave your attributes. You rank them. So then, guys like McSorley, when he's hot, he's got to be incredible. I know you said he goes to the box a lot, but come on, man, that guy when he's got the ability to skate when he's hot. He's an incredible player. Like it's no stopping that guy. You give him the puck, he's just a tank, go right to the net.
Oh yes,
he's
absolutely. And I will say that in those situations when it becomes apparent early on, the first time that Marty touches the puck in a game, and you can tell he's got that zip because of the boost and all that, I'm almost
game on, man.
Oh yeah, I'm almost salivating on the other side because it's like, okay, here comes the end-to-end rushes. I know that this is in play now. I will say though that there are times that even with Marty being slow, that, you know, if I'm like, say, a quarter of the way up the ice or halfway up the ice, and maybe I do like a drop back pass or something like that, and I see a lane to move forward with him, even if Marty is slow, there are still times where I'll move forward with the rush, because if I'm playing a lighter team like Winnipeg or something like that, you know, I know in my mind that's like, well, I mean, the odds of him being checked down, unless the guy gets in close and uses a B check, odds of Marty going down are a good bit lower. So there may be once or twice that I'm going to drive to the net with him and just kind of see what happens. And there are times you get rewarded with that, because sometimes, you know, if a player's used to you doing a lot of passes and going for a lot of one-timers, the guy will just kind of sit back and wait, and he never moves forward to attack you. And so you just go right in and just get a deep goal with Marty. So, you know, it's kind of just one of those games within a game sort of thing. But, and it's funny you mentioned that, really, just the whole boost thing with Super Nintendo, because wasn't there like it was again McMarcus, didn't they unearth a little while ago that a lot of those like speed boosts that are happening with the players that like are very low rated on speed, it turns out that boost is actually like an error that's giving a guy like 100 speed instead of just giving him like
yeah.
And I find that to be almost laughable, but in the best way possible, because I used to wonder for years, like, man, like I would literally say this to myself back in like 2012 playing online or whatever. I would say to myself that, like, man, this is the greatest thing. They put like this up and down variance into the game. A player can get red hot, he becomes awesome. This is so similar to how it is in real life, because a guy plays outside of his body. He has an out of body experience in the playoffs, scores 2 or 3 goals, whatever. And then I laugh all these years later that it turns out that boost, at least when a guy is usually very slow and then he's suddenly maxed out, I laugh because it turns out that actually wasn't intentional. I would assume, obviously, the guys who coded the game for Super Nintendo, I'm assuming they never caught that before they released it. I mean, or if they did catch it, they chose to leave it in. I don't know why you would.
It's
but
not a bug. It's a feature now.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a feature that I find that obviously I like it, and it can make some players downright scary. Eric Lindros is another one. He's typically not extremely fast, but from that opening puck drop, if I get the puck with him with Philly and I see he's fast, it's again, I'm salivating, because it's like, okay, I know how great he is with his weight and his shot accuracy and his shot power. So I'm just salivating when I know that he's going to be a human wrecking ball, demolishing people, and that ability to play a one-on-one game is suddenly there because he's lightning fast. So yes, like you said, it becomes a feature, and one that you learn to love and lean on once you see that it's there.
So you like speed, you very much like speed, and agility is kind of lower on your list. So is Randy Wood a viable option for you to play?
Well, I can tell you that Randy Wood is a player that I have never used in all the years of playing online. His name has come up recently in some of the discussions that I've been seeing on the Super Nintendo side of things. It's just tough I'm not going to say tough to justify using him. I don't know. Maybe I will say justify. It's just hard, though, because it's like, you know, when you got Howard Chuck, LaFontaine, and Alexander McGillney at play, it's one of the best forward groups for Super Nintendo, even despite the fact that they are a light group. So, yeah, to me, Randy Wood would kind of be a no-go, but it's no disrespect to the player. It's just because you've already got just such a great top 3 already. I'm sure that at different points over time, that as I get more bored, or that I'm, you know, exploring more with the lineups kind of in this phase that I'm in right now, I may give him a look and see, just because Dale Howardchuk, you know, the shot ratings are just astronomically low. Maybe somebody like Randy Wood, I don't know his shot ratings off the top of my head, but Maybe somebody like him could be more effective in the right context. I'm not too sure, but yeah, just a player that unfortunately I don't have a whole lot of experience with. But I would say at this point, just based off the little I know, and more importantly, what I do know about their top three forwards, to me, he's a no-go at this point.
Scott Mellenby is an instant bench for you. You don't even touch the guy. Yeah,
instant bench. Now, I will say though, for Florida, especially on the Super Nintendo side of things, and I'm sure this is the same in Genesis, Super Nintendo, you're looking for any help that you can get on the bench. And so it's like, I kind of have a lineup in my head of, who I would use for Florida. And I want to say, I hope I pronounce his last name right. It's Mike Howe. And then there's Tom Fitzgerald.
So Mike Huff.
Okay, Mike Huff. Okay, thank you for that. Because yeah, I've never known how you pronounce his name. either Mike Huff or Tom Fitzgerald, but that's not really saying much. It's like it's just one of those two for just lack of a better option. Because just the amount of guys with Florida that just the ratings are the same and abysmally low across the board. I know Mellenby's overall is better than the other guys, but the little bit that I've used him with Florida, just the lack of speed, and I know he fumbles pucks a decent amount. I literally do not start Scott Mellenby the rare time that I use for Florida. And even if like a guy gets injured or there's a penalty situation, I try to steer as far away from Mellenby as possible, if I'm being dead honest.
How come no love for Kevin Lowe? I saw your write-up.
So, yes.
Kevin, I like the guy, man. I mean, the player. Why no love for him?
Well, actually, if I remember correct, did I forget to mention Kevin Lowe in the write-up? Or did
you might have mentioned him, but I can't remember if you mentioned him, but he wasn't like on the top of the depth chart. I don't know if it was Zubov or Leach with Patrick, but for me, I always do Patrick and Lowe. Guarantee. I think Leach out. He's for whatever reason, I think he's trash in the game, and Lowe's he gets to start all the time. And I saw that, man. Why don't you start? Where's the love for Lowe? I think he's a good player.
No, and that's an extremely fair point, Len, because honestly, the last probably, and I'm glad you bring this up because it may lead to me actually changing that write-up a little bit. The last probably 3 weeks or so that I've been playing online, the little bit that I've used the New York Rangers, I have started using Kevin Lowe because, yes, I find that like with the change in the weight, Kevin's 204 pounds, Brian Leach is 188 pounds, and Brian Leach has a very, very good agility rating, but honestly, the speed does leave something.
He's slow as shit.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that maybe I just never noticed it enough over the years, or maybe it's like one of those where maybe he was getting like enough speed boosts when I would use New York to where I just was not noticing the lack of speed. But at some point in the last little while, the lack of speed for Brian Leach on a consistent basis has become more apparent. So I have started using Kevin Lowe a little bit more, and I see immediately why guys prefer to use him on Super Nintendo. Because yes, the higher weight and the ability to make more consistent body checks, obviously that's very, very important. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin Lowe, I think at least has an equal defensive awareness rating to Brian Leach, if not better. So that's one right there that's very, very important to consider too. So yes, I have started to use Kevin Lowe a little bit more, and my pairing has been Patrick and Lowe. And really, I do find, honestly, one of the more underrated pairings in the game, because Lowe is one that, yeah, sure, the overall rating dictates that he's 62, 64, something like that. But he's a player that I think punches well above his weight class in terms of overall rating. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is something that kind of, as I'm working on these write-ups a little bit more, I either may very well go back and edit that write-up and kind of change my thought of just who my default pairing is, because as I've gotten more into it these last 3 weeks, I do think there's an extremely strong case, and really in my mind, I start to think that Kevin Lowe is a better option than Brian Leach. So yeah, that's one I may very well either rewrite just on the main post, or I may even put another like post afterwards and just kind of write an additional blurb and just really honestly just say, hey, after more careful consideration, this is probably your best bet for a starting pairing.
You notice it on Super Nintendo. A lot of posts get hit, way more than it happens in the Sega Genesis. Are posts absolute bullshit in the game? Because it seems to happen so often. And I'm like, why? I know Marcus created a fix to remove that, but I'm wondering if you think it's absolute bullshit to have these posts get hit so often.
I'll kind of be something of a pacifist with my answer, at least initially anyway. I can 100% understand that why Genesis guys like yourself, come over to Super Nintendo, play it. I can understand why you guys see it as too many posts and why you don't care for it. It makes perfect sense to me. And really, when we look at it from that standpoint, yes, fully justified in what you're saying. I do think, just in my experiences over the years, I feel like that just, you play thousands of online games, whether it's exhibitions and then, hundreds of regular season games, hundreds of playoff games, whatever. I feel like the amount of posts is a little bit overstated because me personally, and again, I know it's anecdotal. There's some guys, they see a ton of posts in most games, and I get it. For me, it's like I actually feel like the amount of posts is relatively fair. At times it leans on too many because you will get those occasional games where it seems like the only thing you can do is hit the post. And there are times where it becomes a little bit maddening, but I feel like that you play enough, just with thousands of games, and it kind of does even itself out over time. I feel like the posts are kind of an important part because I don't know. It's just, it's kind of, it's part of the game. It is frustrating, obviously, that you make a great passing play, set up 5 or 6 passes. You take a great long distance shot with, say, a Dmitry Kristich, and it just doinks right off the post, and you throw your hands up because you feel like the scoring chance got wasted. But it's one of those that if you're an effective enough player, if you kind of win enough puck battles, or you know what you're doing in all facets of the game, you're going to generate enough scoring chances where it seems like the post problem almost takes care of itself, and you kind of just quickly move on and go to the next scoring chance. And so it's one of those that when I go on the flip side, I play Genesis, and I'm usually surprised at the amount of posts I don't see. And I don't mean that as a criticism towards Gens. I don't mean it that way whatsoever. It's just one of those things that where if I try to come back to the beginning, I can absolutely see why the Genesis guys feel like that Super Nintendo has too many posts, because they're just not there as much on Genesis. And at least in that scheme of things, though, it does mean that the goals are more consistent, say, on one-timers and on dekes. So I will at least give that as a positive to Genesis, that if you set up the scoring chance correctly, odds are it's going to go in, and it's one less factor that gets taken away. So, it's got kind of its pros and cons. Again, I know that's something of a pacifist answer, but, I try to at least look at it from that standpoint.
What controller you use when you play online?
It's funny. I was looking at it to see if I had it right next to me. I don't, but so what I use is a PlayStation 4 controller. I go Bluetooth right into my laptop. I'm on Windows 10, so I Bluetooth right into my computer, and I use it, and I'm kind of shrugging my shoulders a little bit. I'll go ahead and let this one slip. I don't know how the community will feel about it, but I use the analog sticks when I'm playing. I know that I'm not the only player that uses the analog stick, but I'll be the first one to kind of acknowledge that probably does give me the ability to do some dekes that guys would not normally be able to do on a D-pad. And so I'll be the first one to say that if I'm ever at King of 94 and I'm playing live, guys will probably be quite surprised at how inefficient my skating is in a live context because I'm not on an analog stick. And if that's something, and again, I'll be the first one to take the grenade for it. If that's one where I get 5 messages tonight or tomorrow or wherever from guys saying, hey, that's a bunch of BS, you need to use the D-pad, I'll go ahead and I'll use the D-pad from then on if it's something that's frowned upon. I'll be the first one to say it. But I have asked a couple guys over time, and I have found that at least a decent number of Super Nintendo guys are using an analog stick, whether it's on a USB controller, PlayStation 4 controller, whatever. So again, something of a pacifist answer, but at least just trying to be open on just what I'm using and just answering your question in general. So yes, nowadays a PlayStation 4 controller. I have used an Xbox One controller or Series X controller in the past. And then in my heyday, when I used to play a ton online, I think I was just using like a standard Logitech USB controller that you would buy at Walmart.
You ever play any online tournaments before?
So I did. So
that's right, in person. Sorry, in person.
Oh, so never in person. No, it's one of those that just anywhere that I've lived over the years. Obviously, I was too young to be playing online when I lived in New York. When I lived in Tennessee, sure, there's Nashville, obviously Nashville Predators fans, all that sort of stuff. Nashville's your only real hockey hotbed in the state of Tennessee. I never heard of them doing like NHL 94 tournaments in the Nashville area over the years. So I never played in one there by default. And then living in Indiana now for the last 2 years, I've never heard of like any live tournaments here in the state of Indiana. And I've never traveled like outside of the country and been in Canada or anything like that. So I've never done like a live tournament up there. I would love to do it though, because, regardless of like the competition or any of that, it gives a chance like for the face-to-face interaction just and really just meeting like people that love playing the game and just meeting them in person. To me, that's what it's all about, really, because I know it's kind of sidebarring a little bit, but to me, it's like the greatest memories I've ever had of playing this game, especially in the online community. It's been the friendships and the interactions. Just, I use this kind of as an anecdote sometimes, but it's like, playing like a guy like Fenty62, for example, the amount of times I would just laugh uncontrollably at some of the funny stuff he would say, or some of the funny stuff that he would do with his players, like knocking the net off on purpose after a goal's been scored. The amount of times that guy made me laugh, especially when I was a little bit younger in my early 20s, and wasn't doing so good in life at the time, struggling to find myself, all that sort of stuff. The amount of times that a guy like Fenty made me laugh over those couple years playing, that to me, that's what it's all about right there. And so just on that alone, I very much have a high interest in playing live tournaments over the years, because I want to interact with the folks. Obviously, like something like King of 94, I want to meet you guys. I want to forge those relationships, forge those friendships, all that sort of stuff. Because again, that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is the relationships.
Oh, it's so much. I never went to the Super Nintendo side of King. I've been to the last 3 Kings, and all 3 I've only attended the Sega Genesis. But I'm assuming the same experience applies to the very next day. I had a blast at every King. I hope you would attend it. And like you say, one of the most memorable things I have when I go to King is when I play Flame Shelter, when I get kicked out of the tournament and I finally get freed and I can play with him, and we just have so much fun playing games with these goons on the ice. And it's I have just so much fun doing that. That's why I sign up, is to play him and people like him, not to play the tournament, because I'm gonna do nothing in a tournament. I'm just there on cannon fodder. Anything else. All right. That's it for this. I'm gonna just go to the last segment of the show. That's the rapid fire, where I throw you some questions and you quickly see if you can put the puck in the net. Let's see what you could do. So
all right.
I got 10, 15 questions or so. Here we go. Is holding overpowered in Super Nintendo NHL 94?
No, I would say it's not. It's one actually that honestly I don't see it used enough, quite frankly. To me, it's like it's a very, very effective it's a very, very effective tactic and technique. One I don't see used all that often. It's one that I would recommend the newer players that are first coming up in SNESC or SNESB. I almost would recommend them to use it more, because it's something of a fail-safe, if you will. If you're not great at defense, just put your defenseman in front of the goalie, use it. And it's not guaranteed to work, but hey, it's effective. And for us veteran players, at least from my point of view, it's in the game, it's a tactic, it's fair. In a player like myself, you have to evolve to get around it. So to me, it's fair game.
Most overrated team in NHL 94?
Genesis or Super Nintendo, or both?
Super Nintendo.
Chicago. I'm going to say Chicago. And just because it's one where I feel like the overall rating is not necessarily indicative of what the team can, or what the team really does. I will say that that whole thing is changing a little bit in the last little while. I mentioned what I do now with Roenick and Mikhail Goulet. So that's changing a little bit here the last little while. But yeah, I still feel like overall probably the most overrated.
Most underrated team in the game?
Oh, well, I paused it first, but then it's like, it's easy. Edmonton. Put Craig Simpson in at center, and that changes everything.
Most underrated player in the game? We're talking the 16-bit player, not the human opponent.
Oh, yeah.
The controller.
Well, I could apply this to the real player too, but I'm going to say the 16-bit again, Craig Simpson. The amount of damage that I did with him over a long, long period of time of playing online was just unbelievable. And I don't mean that as a pat on my back. It's just one of those that, again, putting him in seemed to be just that magic missing element, to where suddenly for me, it's like Edmonton is no longer a middle of the road team to me. They were a team that I like. People would like, they found it weird that like back in like, the classic leagues or whatever, back in those days, it's like, why is this guy using Edmonton? He could go with Boston. He could go with Pittsburgh. He could go with LA. I chose to use Edmonton because I love using Craig Simpson, and just I got so used to him and the nuances that it's like, hey, he's got great shot accuracy. He's 204 pounds. If he gets a speed boost going into a game, he's deadly.
Giddy up.
So, Yeah, and
Yeah.
and so it's like I get proud when I play guys online nowadays, and I almost always see them subbing in Craig Simpson nowadays on Super Nintendo because I feel like that didn't happen before me. So not to sound arrogant or anything like that, but it's like I'd like to think that I had something of a hand in that happening over the years.
I think I might know the answer to this, but most overrated player in the game.
Yeah, I'm going to say Jeremy Roenick, and not because of
That's my
not
thought.
because of like a disrespect or anything like that. It's again just as far as Super Nintendo is concerned. Again, just that weakness with the weight that I mentioned. I will say though, Genesis, I absolutely see why you guys think, or I shouldn't say think. I see why he's the undisputed best player in Genesis. That's a foregone conclusion because of the weight bug. So so for me saying that on Super Nintendo, that absolutely does not apply on Genesis. He is an absolute wrecking ball and a machine on Genesis.
Ottawa, Anaheim, Florida. Rank these from best to worst.
Ottawa number 1, Anaheim number 2, Florida the worst.
Who's better, Bork or Coffee?
Bork.
Do goalies make any difference in Super Nintendo?
No. And that one, I say that with no hesitation, because if you ever notice in my write-ups, on the website, I never mention a single thing about the goalies. To me, they all play exactly the same. I'm actually honestly surprised that that's never been called out in any of my write-ups, to be dead honest with you.
SNES controller or the Sega Genesis controller, which is better?
I'm only going to say Super Nintendo, but I say that just with the ultimate bias, just because I grew up with a Super Nintendo. That is no disrespect whatsoever to a Genesis controller. That's just what I'm used to, is Super Nintendo and the whole button layout that it has.
Is Ron Barr a liar?
I need more context for this one. What's he lying about?
At least in the Sega Genesis, when he says hot and cold, it really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. So yes, I'm going to say he's a liar. I used to, and now that you clarify that, I remember actually in the beginning when I was younger trying to play the hot hand, so to speak, on Super Nintendo, and finding a lot of times that it wasn't so much the opposite. I just didn't feel like it didn't matter. So yes, now with the context clarified, yes, Ron Barr is a liar.
Most difficult opponent you played against?
Whew. So I mentioned Anditar, of course, early on as the one that I never quite solved. Token Toma is quickly climbing up that list, though. Absolutely tough, especially last night. We played 3 games. He won 2, I won 1, and that's very atypical of most of my sessions with Super Nintendo. I'll give you some credit, though, Len, because the couple times I got to play you were pretty darn tough, and I think you won more times than I did. So I got to give you some credit, too. You're pretty darn
Super
tough.
Nintendo?
Yeah, you and I played a couple times, and you not only held in there. I think all the games were usually 1-goal games, but I'm pretty sure you won more than you lost. So you're pretty tough.
I almost never play Super Nintendo. I'm shocked that it was the case. I bet if we try now, it's going to be just a one-sided affair.
I don't know.
Okay, which is a better Super Mario 2? The one that Tokidoki Panic that's been reskinned, or Lost Levels?
Oh, this is one of the greatest questions I've ever been asked. I love this question so much. If we're talking about, oh man, see, I got to say a lot without really answering the question. I'm like a politician, basically. It's kind of, if I look at it from the standpoint that the original Japanese Super Mario Brothers 2, it absolutely has the spirit. And to me, it's the intended sequel. But again, that bias, I grew up with the USA Super Mario 2. It's what I know it as. I guess I'm going to say the USA version, but man, that they both have their strong points though. And I guess, so, okay, the 7-year-old kid in me is going to answer the USA version. The 36-year-old in me who knows the differences, understands the intention, is going to say the Japanese version. That's a heck of a non-answer for you.
Favorite Madden game? You said you've played Madden. You had a bunch of them. Which is your favorite one?
I'm going to say Madden 2008. And it's funny that, a little bit of a side story here, because I love telling stories. I left the Super Nintendo NHL 94 community back in the summer of 2015. I was still playing video games a lot of that time, doing some emulation here and there. And then I kind of got away from the emulation and the video games and all that, at least, for the most part. They kind of would just become maybe a once a week sort of thing. Then it was probably around 2022, something like that, going through a bit of a tough time in my life, that I decided, well, hey, I'm going to come back to video games. I'm going to come back to emulation. Let's see how much it's all changed in the last 7 years. And so one of the first things I did was on this very computer that I'm connected to you now on, installed several emulators, and the first one was PCSX2. I wanted to see, it's like, okay, I don't have a great GPU, but I've got 16 gigs of RAM. Is this even going to be feasible? Because the last time I tried PS2 emulation in 2016, it was a mess. I couldn't do it with the computer that I was on. The first game I fired up was Madden 2008 on PCSX2 back in 2022. And I was just in heaven. It was running smoothly. I had it upscaled to 900p, whatever it was. So it looked great when I put it on my flat screen TV. And it was the only game I played for like the next 3 or 4 months. And mind you, I never owned Madden 08 back when it first was released, but I played the heck out of it for those number of months. I ended up doing something like, 3-4 seasons in franchise mode, something like that. Won the Super Bowl a couple times. Fast forward to about a year ago, I've always read, of course, this difference with PC games versus like PS2 or Xbox, all of that. So I got my hands on a copy of Madden 08, the PC version, installed it on this very same laptop, and fell in love with it all over again. It's basically the same exact game as the PlayStation 2. It's just the graphics look better, the resolution is better, all of that sort of stuff. So it was just taking to me what was already the best Madden and just making it that much better. And I find for me, like I said, it's like I love playing franchise mode, trying to win the Super Bowl. And then like I try to recreate basically the old like St. Louis Rams greatest show on turf offense, trying to do basically like just their passing concepts they used to do. I try to, flip the old conventional wisdom on its head where, hey, I might throw the ball the first 15 downs of the game, just basically using the pass to set up the run basically, and finding just the way that the AI tries to shift to that. You can get the AI kind of really almost like chasing its own tail, if you will, if you play the game correct. Again, a long-winded answer, but Madden 08 to answer your question.
Is there a worse transition from offensive coordinator to coach than Mike Martz?
That's a tough one, really, because you can look at it in the vacuum that Mike Martz was able to take the Rams to the Super Bowl. But then it's like how fast they fell from grace after that. So really hindsight tells you that Mike Martz was really gifted basically Dick Vermeil's team, and with that collection of offensive firepower, I mean, of course they were going to be able to keep things going for a couple of years after that. And really, I do remember when the Rams lost the Super Bowl in 2002. I remember, when I was 12 years old, I mean, they were my favorite team. I'll also be upfront about that. I remember thinking it's like, all right, yeah, they lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots, but they're going to come back. They're going to be fine. A couple of free agent pickups. They're going to have largely the same team. And then they absolutely crashed that very next year. I know they ended up recovering, making the playoffs the year after that with Mark Bolger as the quarterback, but then they were just completely irrelevant. It's one of the weirdest things to me of how you have this greatest show on turf built as a team that looks practically indestructible, and then it all just falls apart in one fell swoop. Hindsight being 2020, had Dick Vermeil remained as the head coach, I think they would have absolutely kept the greatest show on turf together for at least another few years, and maybe would have won one more Super Bowl potentially. So to answer your question, really, when we look at it from that standpoint, yeah, that may be the worst one of all time, to be dead honest.
Well, I with one caveat, if Vermeil stayed on and they kept Martz as the offensive coordinator, they probably would have been able to replicate a lot of his success. I think if he left as of the offensive coordinator, I think there would have been a hole that, they probably could have plugged it, but I think he was just his mindset, the way he approached the game and how he formulated that offense. I think he was just the perfect storm. And if you took him out of that, yeah. Anyway, that's enough football talk. One last question with 94. Got to ask you, if you could improve one thing in the game in an NHL 94, what would you do to make it better?
That's a very, very good question, and one that I think I've thought about a little bit over the years. I can give you a quick answer right now, and as I'm kind of formulating it, I'm kind of sort of getting another one coming to mind live in real time. If I keep it at the lens of Super Nintendo, if there's one thing I could fix, at least for Super Nintendo 94, slap shots. Us Super Nintendo guys, we know how to score with slap shots, but they are just not nearly as effective as they are on Genesis. Some folks may say that the slap shots are overpowered on Genesis. I disagree with that. I like the fact that slap shots are more wide open on Genesis and that you can score more with them. Granted, you have to know how to set them up. You've got to be good at, basically kind of like covering your approach or kind of like masking the approach, if you will. Otherwise, a seasoned player will snuff it out every time. But Super Nintendo, you really only have like a couple of hot spots on the ice that you can hit a slap shot against a computer controlled goalie. And even then, when those hot spots, it's not going to go in every time. You're either going to get that occasional post that rears its ugly head, or the puck's going to sail wide, or the goalie's going to make some magical save, whatever. It's just not quite effective enough. I will say that the slap shots are deadly effective, that if you're coming down on a breakaway against somebody and he switches to manual goalie, if you time it just right, you can get the slapper and rip it right by somebody with, like, say, a Teemu Selanne or a Craig Simpson. And it's extremely satisfying on Super Nintendo. I love that aspect of it, but it's the whole slap shots versus a computer goalie that I wish that could be improved. The only other thing I could add, if we want to just put it at NHL 94 as a whole, regardless of what platform, I wish there was like a board play mechanic, like what they introduced, like say in like NHL 10 or NHL 11, just that whole ability to press a guy to the boards.
Yeah.
I wish that something like that was in NHL 94. That would be really, really cool. And I feel like just add another tactical element to the game.
Well, with that, we'll tie a bow on this episode. Appreciate you coming on. This has been a fun one.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Len.
No problem, brother.